And the other day, I saw a demonstration of this chat GPT,
Yeah.
but the newer version that they are releasing, or that's out right now. And essentially, this thing can tell if you're breathing out of the ordinary. Hi, everyone. I've been increasingly more scared of AI than I have been for the last few years. And the other day, I saw a demonstration of this chat GPT,
Yeah.
but the newer version that they are releasing, or that's out right now. And essentially, this thing can tell if you're breathing out of the ordinary, which makes me question my ability to keep a job in the near future if this continues to go in the direction it's going. Have you seen the video? I could play it here if you have.
hmm
I haven't seen the video.
I haven't seen it, but I've sort of heard what you're talking about. Heard people talking about the very thing you're describing.
Well, the what it is just this normal AI, like you're talking to Siri, right? The person is like, I'm very anxious or something like this. And the thing suggests, well, maybe we can take some deep breaths. And the guy on purpose started to breathe really harsh. And it's like, whoa, the AI said, whoa, how about you slow down and breathe with my count? And I'm like, oh no, wait a minute. It's really interesting what it's doing. It's kind of aware of how you're breathing, the tone of your voice. It's moving in that direction more and more.
So, what careers are protected? What can AI not do? Are we trying to make ourselves obsolete with AI?
I think from the perspective of what it can do, I think there are so many people that are underserved that one of the things that AI can do is it can screen a lot of people that just have kind of basic questions. And if you can do that, then like think of if it reaches 300,000 people a year, that's not a lot of people, but that's a significant portion of people who are underserved that might not otherwise get services. And I did read an article where they were talking about that AI can now begin to screen emergency service calls and directs them to a live person if needed, right? And so it seems to me that it would just make it potential could be more efficient if it doesn't become something like Voldemort.
Mhm.
It does seem like the potential is significant.
Yeah, I think that we need to look at what are the pros and cons of it. And my concern is that a real live person is talking to a computer, and that, as we know, it's not an expert. Like AI makes mistakes. And so, how is that going to impact a person who, is in crisis? I think we need to look at and maybe have a discussion about what are the pros and cons of it and how helpful is it and how challenging is it? I mean, in some ways, I'm not concerned about it taking over my job. I'm concerned about it hurting clients.
Yeah, hurting the public. And what is our responsibility in providing guidelines? Like that's been the most recent things that I've read. Like what's the responsibility of agencies, and who's responsible for providing guidelines that support mental health treatment? Like what are the ethics of a clinician create AI generated action plan?
I've used AI in my psychopathology class, put in a case and said, AI, generate a treatment plan for this particular story. And the treatment plan is pretty straightforward. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so using that as a tool, not so much as something that helps you
Yeah.
conceptualize, or even at the beginning stages of a case. Like what do you think about something like this for a person that is dealing with anxiety? And it might be a really good tool as you're
Yes.
approaching a case. But again, there's a fine line in sort of can you help me conceptualize a person's diagnosis?
Right.
And take away details that might point at someone's personal information.
And that's different than actually a person in crisis speaking to an AI. So, I mean, I think one of the pros is that you might get information that can be helpful as a clinician. As a client, you might get information that's helpful because they might be able, AI could give them a list of therapists in their area. So, what do you think some of the other challenges might be?
I think the rate at which AI learns, it learns constantly. It doesn't have to take time to process in the way that we do. It doesn't sleep. And with millions of people using it and feeding it, it's collecting so much information so quickly. How do we then not prove that it is more efficient than we are as
Right.
humans, especially if it's learning inflections in voices or the rate at which someone is breathing quickly? I'm all for evolution and science and all that jazz. And I also just wonder, as humans, as a society, like what everything is not beneficial. Just because we can do it, just because it's permissible, doesn't mean it's beneficial. It doesn't mean that it actually is a good route to go. So I just wonder, like, what are we doing? Like when it boils down to it, the purpose that we've come up with, what is it serving? Yes, it can do a lot of these things, but then in the grand scheme of things, we already struggle with interpersonal skills. The younger generations coming up now barely have a certain level of resilience in communicating with people or managing or holding space for other people's feelings and emotions. Like AI then just decreases the need to develop these skills as individuals even more. So what are we doing to ourselves as a whole?
It is more efficient than we are. If you define efficiency as being able to take in information, big piece of information over time and then use that, we can't do that. But I could imagine that someone calls up in crisis that the algorithm is able to pay attention to tone of voice and then say hook a person up with a kind of an emergency center where you can talk to a real person. That seems pretty cool.
But again, who's responsible for
Right,
advocating for something like this?
right, right.
The demand is insane for it to just continue to get better without much guidance as to how it's working or where it's getting information. Like they probably have their guidelines, but there are people that are probably going to look for it for mental health.
Oh yeah.
And
They did WebMD right now.
Mhm.
People search WebMD for I have these symptoms. What could that mean? But it'd be interesting to see. Now you see telehealth and being more written about. It'd be interesting to see the research about what is the algorithms being used for successfully. What's the data? What are we learning about people that use the AI for addressing mental health needs? What do we know about it? They have to be held to the same level of scrutiny that we do face-to-face therapy, research on outcome.
We
Um,
can ask AI.
exactly. That's a great idea.
I just think of the level of jobs it's going to take over. Then when people don't have jobs and they're not working, not just like it replacing us as therapists, but if people don't have jobs and then what are we doing? Like what happens? What things are going to be left untouched? Seriously, because like we have movies about it. We've been making movies about it for a very, very long time. What is the end game? What are we really trying to see as a society, as humanity, really? Because this is not just given to those who have privilege or certain freedoms. Anyone, anywhere can have access. And what does that mean for everybody? Does it
Right.
give everyone an even playing field or where does it put us?
It is free to use.
Right.
It's really a great question because if anyone can give input, you know, and I'm just saying this as a possibility, then people could give input about mental health that's not correct.
Or the snapshots.
Right.
A lot of what we see on social media is a snapshot. A lot of people will take just a reel and just look at that and not do the extra work and look at the bigger picture. And then they'll take a little piece and they'll say, oh, that's me. That's my diagnosis. I struggle with that. This is who I am. And people have gotten in trouble with that. So this is even grander and larger of a scale that is not being managed at all.
The idea, I agree with that so much, Porsche. Like the other day, I had a client come in the office and they were on TikTok looking at stories, and one came up about something about anxiety, but something very rare. And she's like, "Yeah, that Frank, what do you think about this? Because I think that I have this." Imagine putting a sense of value in what AI can do for people. Like, oh, it's helped me out in all these other ways. Why don't I ask it to ask me about or to explain possible diagnoses? And then people are placing the sense of importance as to this formulation that something came up with that might be helpful, but might be not correct. Like the whole thing about someone asking, like, how can I? It was something. It was a Google AI thing where someone asked it to do like a recipe or a pizza recipe, and one of the ingredients that it said was, oh, use glue to kind of make the cheese stick, and it provided as part of a step. And the person is like, wait a minute, and they posted it everywhere. It was a big story, and apparently it was information that the AI took from Reddit.
Oh,
And it was someone joking around about using glue to make the pizza stick. But it took it and it provided an answer in Google. Like if Google has a new AI that gives you steps if you're looking for steps to something.
well, it goes back to your question about who's responsible for kind of curating the information, and who is there a federal agency that's responsible for overseeing that? And then it becomes again, let kind of competing corporate interests kind of getting involved in that. One of the things that does address is kind of the scalability idea that in order to scale it up in countries where there's no access to healthcare, even in our country, think about all the people that are waiting for mental health services. So the scalability, the potential for scaling up something is huge. I don't think that we're at risk of losing our job. I think it'll be more effectively screening people in at therapy. Oh, I need to see a real person. And maybe the AI can be able to, in the short run, you'll deal with someone for a while, and then AI will say, you've been talking to me for like 6 weeks. Maybe you should be talking to a real person in some ways to be able to kind of make a distinction.
Managing a list, managing a caseload, not
Yeah.
caseload, but like referrals.
Yeah. Well, what about an individual therapist has a kind of a practice manager as AI that's being able to screen, emails that come in and providing people with psychoeducation regularly? That seems like a pretty interesting thing.
So that's a pro.
Oh, yeah, probably. Yeah.
I'm just thinking how, especially as systemic therapists, how we think human contact relationships are really important. And already we've gone from being in the office to telehealth, which is once removed.
And not going
Uh,
back.
and we're not going back. So are we going to keep removing the way in which we relate? Because I was talking to someone the other day about telehealth. It was a supervisee, and we were talking about doing systemic therapy. And I would say, I was talking about, well, they were in the room. You could ask them to move their chairs to look at each other. But now, when I do telehealth, sometimes my clients are in different rooms. So already there's, we're one step away from where we were. So if AI gets involved, then there's the contact and the connection in some ways becomes more distant, or at least that's my thought right now about it.
Yeah, at least it has the potential certainly to become this.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, if we decide, then because we know that a big part of what we do is related to feelings. Yes, we have our theories and the frameworks we work from. And then there's that piece to the side where it's feelings and emotions that then shift the direction. And if AI at this point has a grasp and grip on feelings and emotions, that's where the scariness comes in for me. I forget who said it earlier, but it wasn't so scary before, but it's starting to become scarier, and it's starting to look like the things that we've seen in the cinemas. That's like, oh, that's funny. We won't get there. But seeing that the recipe is really close to some of this stuff, now that the visual plus seeing some of the actions, it's starting to feel a little too real for me personally, and it is uncomfortable and unsettling.
Just because it can show emotions or sort of mimic the way that we speak, it doesn't mean that of course, it's not feeling it. And I think like if you had sessions like starting like at your therapy journey, you train using models that are very you're manualized. You have to kind of follow a structure. How many times have you falling into that like model because it's sort of how you're doing it and created a wall between you and your client? Even if you try as much as you can to make a connection, even through the manual work, it's hard to create that sense of togetherness and like that the space in between us, like you mentioned, David, in the
Yeah.
before, like
Yeah.
that. It's hard to establish, and even a situation like that. I'm imagining that AI probably has to have that issue because of how it would work with someone.
That
There's
makes a lot of sense.
it's manualized. So what is it going to pull from?
Right. So here is a study that I read about elders, where they did these lonely elders, and they put these kitties, these mechanical robots, in the home of the elder. And every morning, the elder, the robot would check in and say, "Good morning, Fred," and the person would respond. And even though the elder knew it was a robot, and they felt the benefit of just having someone to talk to. And if they needed something, then they would get screened into something more. But in this particular case, even though everybody knew it was fake, they felt supported. They felt less lonely by virtue of just talking to someone. I think that sort of in some ways speaks to what that concern is, a potential to have that rich connection, even though the algorithm itself isn't a person. You're going to feel connected to yourself.
It makes me think of like when you go to the doctor, the nurse comes in, you're with the nurse, they do, and they get you ready and they get you prepped, and then the doctor comes in.
Right.
I'm like, so is AI the nurse or the nurse practitioner before you get into the other pieces of the work? And my concern, and this has always been a concern of mine, is just the lack of human connection, period. We already have so many degrees of separation from human to human. As the generations go on, as the time goes on, I think we do worse and worse connecting, loving, engaging, creating space with one another. And this just creates an even larger barrier to actually separate us even more. So it's like, would more human connection help resolve some of these issues versus, well, we're not getting human connection. So let's create an artificial intelligence to fill in the gap, which then creates more of the lack of human connection.
I was just going to say it does come down to human connection. And yet we're now living in a culture where, and I think this is what you're saying, Portia, where that's becoming more and more distant, but it's also more and more normal. Like, I grew up in a culture that didn't have cell phones. And then, I would call instead of text once I got my cell phone. And now I text more than I call. So does everyone else. So it keeps, that distance, it becomes one more removed each time. And so that's one of my concerns about AI. I think there's lots of gray area. I don't think it's black or white. It's either good or bad. I think it has lots of potential on the one hand and could be very dangerous on the other.
Yeah, I think that in some ways it's the responsibility of the community, the mental health community, to make the case for personal connection. That if we're advertising that as important, then we're going to embody that, and people are going to be attracted to that. We have to sell it in a certain way. Like we're selling it and people want it. And so we have to make the case for why that's important. We're part of that community that's struggling with all of this. We're just as strong of the voice. So how do we amplify that voice about the importance of personal connection?
Yeah, I mean, we can have a voice, but we don't have the power.
Well, who has
Like we don't have the power to say, okay, AI can do this, but it can't do that.
right?
I guess that's what I'm saying. That there isn't someone who oversees it, just like there's issues now with social media about what should be on social media or what shouldn't be on social media. And that, there's this, they're trying to figure that out.
Right.
So,
You had mentioned systemically earlier. Wouldn't you say that systemically, the problem isn't linear? It isn't down there. The problem
right,
exists. We're just
right,
part of the web, a circular
right.
web of
We can do our part,
yeah, yeah,
but other people have to respond
right, yeah. What is our part?
to,
Is the question we're wrestling
right,
with.
right.
And I think in how I think about it, what makes me feel a bit less anxious about how it's moving is that I need to be start using it. I need to start using it in a way that I think is ethically responsible for
Mm,
people. I need to start using it to be familiar with its progress and where it's at and what it can do, and establish it as as an assistant, not as something that can take my job. But if
right.
we we start if we start to engage with it, then we have a little bit more room to understand its flaws, to talk about it in the way that we're talking about it, and create a sense like the same way that the telehealth was. So there was like a lot of people jumping at the opportunity to see people online, but then we started to see some downfalls, and then came those regulations, then came those sort of guidelines that came from like certain places, but the people grabbed onto those immediately when that was available. But it didn't happen up until people were actively engaged with the process, and so some of the downfalls
Mhm,
come their way if they engage with it in that way.
right,
Yeah, and that's why I think we need to look at the ways in which it's helpful and the ways in which there's challenges.
right, right.
And we need to understand it to do that. Like we need to get to know it.
Yeah. Remember the guy who just died, Martin Spurlock, who ate junk food for 30 days, just ate McDonald's for 30 days? We need to have somebody here who needs to just engage with AI for 30 days. And then we could be writing about it as we kind of go through it. Look how we're using it, how it's struggling, and what we're learning. That would be an interesting uh, kind of series, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Wondering if AI can give me like some advice about, like, can you be my therapist? Let's see what it
I have
says.
it right up right now.
Oh, can you be my therapist? Let's see what it says.
I also want to ask it what guidelines and bylaws does it function by? Does it know its flaws?
There it is. I'm here to provide support and information, but I'm not a licensed therapist. However, I'm happy to listen if you want to talk about something, if you have questions about mental health. If you're dealing with a serious mental health issue, it's important to seek help from a qualified professional.
Yay.
Thank you, AI.
Thank you.
What can we ask you? What are some ethics that
Yeah.
by like when there's mental?
What is your code of ethics around mental health?
Oh, it's listing all of them. AI and mental health encompass a range of private. This is privacy and confidentiality, informed consent, bias and fairness, transparency and accountability, autonomy and human oversight. They're listing a bunch of them, and they end it with addressing these ethical issues requires collaboration among developers, researchers, policymakers, and stakeholders. So they're saying all the same things that we're talking about.
I paid a lot of money for that class.
Yes.
All the things that AI is listing, I paid a lot of money to discuss that in a class.
There's a check in the mail for you, Portia, just to get that.
So I have this idea because that they just spit back everything that's been written about ethics.
Correct.
But I wonder if if you gave it a case or say, I'm trying to think of a question that you could ask them about ethics or about a case around ethics.
I'm sure I'm sure it would respond. You know, it would respond. It would say something.
It would say something, but that's what I'm wondering when we get down to the nitty gritty of stuff, because, they just spit back what's on a syllabus
Yeah.
around ethics.
Let me ask it something about a case where, and this will be the last bit here.
Okay.
But let me ask it. I have it here. I have it here on my end. I wanted to ask about a client that I had. I'm not disclosing any names, but I just want to. It's a dynamic between the mom and dad. They're divorcing, and I'm seeing them for family therapy. Can you give me advice as to what to do with a family and who is divorcing, and I'm seeing the child for therapy? Is there any guidelines that you could give me if I work in Massachusetts?
Supporting a child going through their parents' divorce can be challenging. Here are some guidelines tailored for Massachusetts, given your expertise. First, ensure you understand the legal context. In Massachusetts, both parents usually have the right to access their child's medical and psychological records unless
Impressive.
communication is key. Maintain open lines of communication with both parents if possible. Be neutral and avoid taking sides. Create a safe space for the child. Let them express their feelings and validate those emotions. Help them understand that the divorce is not their fault. Encourage consistency. Recommend that both parents keep routines as consistent as possible to provide stability for the child. Work on coping strategies. Teach the child ways to manage stress and anxiety related to the divorce. Collaboration is important. If appropriate, collaborate with other professionals involved in the child's life, such as school counselors. Monitor for changes. Keep an eye on any behavioral or emotional changes in the child and address these promptly. Finally, familiarize yourself with Massachusetts laws and resources. The Massachusetts Association for Marriage and Family Therapy, MAMFT, might offer additional resources and support.
That's not a thing.
Dated.
Advice on any specific aspect?
That association is not around anymore. What happened?
Yeah.
The Massachusetts Association for Marriage and Family Therapy, MMFT, dissolved in recent years. This dissolution typically happens due to various factors, such as financial.
I put the same question in, and what it came up with was that yours didn't talk about was child custody and visitation issues, documentation issues, right? All the very things that we all know are so important.
Yeah, and the one thing I thought it didn't include around custody is if you're seeing a child and you have to get permission from both parents.
Yeah.
That sort of thing.
Right.
So again, I think that it took all this information that we all know from different places and puts it into, the answer to your question, but it wasn't totally correct. For example, there is no MAMFT anymore.
And in fact, that was one of the issues that we see the most in the Board for Allied Mental Health, and that's the one that it missed.
What's that one?
The one around custody, and yours did it, but this one did it.
Which is really important. It's one of the ones that often come up in front of the board.
Well, I think when I think about the AI and this little exercise that we're doing, it's important for the therapist to know what they don't know. So it gets you looking in the direction. So I need to know more about this. There's lots of issues I don't know about. So maybe it reminds you, oh, there's a lot out there. And so you have to be clear when you're messing around or dealing with clients that are so complex. You have to kind of be clear about where you're standing, where you're treading.
It makes me think of a course in using AI for therapy.
Yeah, exactly.
I think
this, Frank, I think if you develop one, there'll be places that you can definitely teach it.
Absolutely.
So you have a job for sure, Frank.
Yeah.
Frank, you're way ahead of the curve with clinicians who know about AI.
I'll send you. There's a book that I recently read. It's called, basically the premise is single session therapy, where they talk a lot about AI and essentially say that AI has the potential it shifts the responsibility for mental health from just simply mental health professionals to the community, that the community should also be involved in community mental health. It's not just limited to mental health professionals. And so it creates more opportunity for us to think about how we can support each other's mental health in the community.
Right. And it's very important. In fact, a community-based mental health worker, you have to consider others as part of treatment.
Absolutely.
Right. This would make it easier to do than the way we have to do it now, which is to call people up and resources or get permission to talk to other therapists.
Well, wrapping up here, I feel a little bit less anxious, but not enough.
Right.
And I think it's an aspect of needing to be more involved in conversations like this, evolving and sort of getting to know some of the research too. I've heard some some interesting things about how it's developed that would lead us to understand like why it gives us answers like that are not as complete as I would like it to be.
Just to look kind of a lighthearted look at how AI can be useful, there's a movie that was just released called Atlas. It's
Yeah.
on Netflix, and it's about an AI used. Jennifer Lopez stars in it. If you can, it's the sci-fi, but it has an interesting twist on AI.
Got it. Yeah, that's a good tip.
Well, this was an interesting conversation for sure. I wasn't expecting this one. This was wonderful.